Gracias.
Bienvenida.
Thank you so
Gracias.
much.
Thank you.
I apologize for coming on the floor, waiting to speak. Un placer. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much. I'll get right over here. Thank you.
Congressman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen doesn't need to be introduced,
Oh, you're so
as
sweet.
he's very well recognized for
To that. We also urged USAID, and Eddie Acevedo, our staff director, and I just met with the USAID director of this area, of this hemisphere, on this very issue. We urged USAID and the Department of State to assist the media in closed societies to promote an open and free press. We're used to an open and free press. Look at our presidential elections, what's happening now, the things that they say about X candidate and what they say about Y candidate. And we take that for granted. But in some of the countries throughout the world, as we know, that's not the case. The government wants to control and restrict everything. Now, this resolution passed the House with an overwhelming vote. 399 in favor and 2 against. I cannot imagine what happened in the minds of those individuals who thought, yes, we're not going to advocate for a free press in Latin America. Surely this can't be the reason. Let's hope that they were mad about something else and not the issue at hand. But what's been happening in Ecuador? We have seen Rafael Correa attack and even sue press outlets and journalists who publish stories that are critical of his regime. Journalists have to think twice about what they write, what they cover, what they want to publish, if they're able to publish it. Because their chief executive, the president of that country, is actually suing press outlets, suing journalists who dare to question his actions. So it's important to note that the international community does notice these atrocities. They are atrocities, because these crimes don't have to be physical altercations for us to label them as atrocities. They're outrageous. These acts by the governments are outrageous acts against freedom. And we must condemn them as they occur. If you let one go because you think, oh, I've been too critical, let me let this one go, that is a signal to the oppressor that that's something that they can get away with. You can't let anything go. Nobody gets a free pass. Every egregious violation against freedom of the press has to be called out. Now, what about international organizations? How do they look at the press freedoms in Ecuador? Well, Freedom House, a highly respected institution, has rated Ecuador as, quote, not free, end quote. That's their category, not free, for a 3rd consecutive year. Can you imagine that your country is rated in this manner? Should it worry the chief executive? Of course. But that's the way that he can control the population. The Ecuadorian NGO Fundamedios reported in 2015 that Ecuador experienced 368 aggressions on journalists. Aggressions on journalists, 368. Now, how many days in the year? So this is 1 act per day and more. A 44% increase from the previous year. Is the situation getting better in Ecuador, or is it getting worse? These are fundamental numbers that easily tell that story. The State Department 2015 Human Rights Report, what did they have to say? So this is now the 3rd organization that I'm citing as saying how they describe Ecuador. Our own State Department said the Ecuadorian regime uses libel laws against media companies, against journalists, against private individuals. So here is the full weight of the government smashing down a company that's in charge of journalism, a newspaper, a TV station, a journalist, even private individuals are not immune. Also, the State Department Human Rights Report said that while the Constitution provides for an independent judiciary, outside pressure and corruption impaired the judicial process. In many of these countries, you would find a constitution that reads lovely. Oh my goodness, look at all of these freedoms that exist. The more lovely the Constitution, the more you should worry most of the time. So the Constitution says an independent judiciary. The reality, pressure, and corruption are demolishing the judicial system. And unless if you don't have a free press, and if you don't have an independent judiciary, what recourse does the person or the journalist have? And the corruption, this is from our own State Department, the corruption exists in the legislative and judicial branches. So you have an executive branch that is overusing its powers to silence and intimidate its critics. You have a legislative branch that is corrupt, and you have a judicial branch that our own State Department says is riddled with corruption. Those are the three branches of government: executive, judicial, and legislative. What hope, what resource, what recourse are available to journalists and human rights activists? Even the Committee to Protect Journalists, another respected organization, has listed Ecuador as a country of concern. And in its report, the Committee to Protect Journalists said, and I quote, "Ecuador has one of the worst press freedom records in Latin America." There's a lot of competition for being the worst. Ecuador is right up there. It's Olympian in its spirit of competition, with journalists subject to legal measures, to defamation suits, and public insults. It is very hard for a journalist to put up a story critical of the regime when you have this working against you, when you could be sued. Who has the financial wherewithal to fight a lawsuit? Who can say, when your neighbors hear that you are a corrupt journalist, because you won't be attacked for being a journalist. They will say que eres un ladrón, un estafador, un traficante, una persona que está lavando dinero. They will have trumped up charges against you. These defamation suits are aimed to silence you, to ruin your character and your integrity, and to silence you. And even public insults. Oh my goodness, it's like wearing a scarlet letter. Remember in the bad old days. And that's what they're doing to journalists. And the Committee to Protect Journalists also said that authorities' attempts to amend the Constitution to categorize communications as a public service is another attempt to censor news and control information. So now they're saying that this is a public service to communicate, and if you're not doing the right thing, well, then you're doing the community a disservice, as if they control the airwaves and the newsprint and every organization and dissemination of information that should belong to every man and woman. So it's important for all of us to work together, to shine a spotlight of the atrocities that are being committed in Ecuador, because many other countries are using Korea's playbook. We've seen these terrible actions. The number one, you know what comes to your mind, Venezuela. We're seeing Electoral Council abusing their power to avoid a recall referendum. Maduro is desperate. What can he do to get away from this referendum? So he uses this Electoral Council, he uses the judicial system to continue to bring up trumped up charges against Venezuelan opposition leaders and even US citizens. He has booted out Miami Herald journalists from Venezuela to try to control what reporters are reporting on. And you know, if you want your beat in Venezuela, and if you want your office in Caracas, the word goes out, don't cover this referendum. Don't cover the September 1st march. because you will lose your media credentials. What about Nicaragua? The same thing is happening. Ortega misuses the judicial system and the Electoral Council to help silence the opposition, to intimidate the opposition. And of course, the worst violator of all, sadly, my native homeland of Cuba. The Castro tyrannical regime does not allow an independent press, an independent judiciary. None of those are existent on the island, not since Castro took over illegally in '59. And its repression against the Cuban citizens on the island have only escalated after Obama's concession in 2014. And that's the irony of it. As the United States extended its hand, we did not wait for Castro to unclench his fist. So the fist is still clenched, and that's why you have a brave human rights activist like Coco Fariñas, who had been on a hunger strike for over 50 days, to call attention to what is going on. That's why you have the ladies, Las Damas de Blanco, beaten up every Sunday for calling attention to the plight of political prisoners. But the press wants to cover the cool cars. Kim Kardashian is in Cuba. Isn't this cool? Wow, Madonna just came back from Cuba. Isn't that cool? Look at these funky cars. This is very cool. And the suffering of the Cuban people gets ignored. So we've got to recognize that the abuse of the judicial system is being used by ALBA countries, those that I've named, as a tool to silence the opposition. So we must call them out on it. We've got to condemn these actions because the free and impartial judicial system is the basis of a free and open society. And I'm confident that with forums such as this one, in which we publicly denounce such abusive tactics, we will make progress in educating Congress on the realities going on within Latin America. So I thank the organizations that put this together. I thank the Inter-American Institute for Democracy. I thank the Inter-American Bar Association. Y más que nada le doy las gracias a mi amigo Carlos. Un placer y un honor estar con ustedes. Este tema es de mucha importancia. Cuente conmigo y después de este foro, si quieren un café cubano con estos bocaditos, pasen por este mismo piso 2206, el mejor café cubano de Washington. No lo puedo decir en Miami, pero en Washington no hay competencia. Bueno, muchísimas gracias. Muy agradecida. Gracias. Y Eddie Acevedo lo va a preparar. El señor